Olga stood at the door of the office building, watching the employees hurrying about their business. She was wearing the standard janitor's uniform, gray pants, a blue jacket, and a small name tag on her chest. Everyone around her was busy going about their business, discussing important projects, exchanging glances, laughing and bantering with each other. Every day in this building was similar to the earlier one, and Olga had long ago gotten used to the fact that she did not exist here. She was part of a big mechanism, but her place in this world seemed insignificant. Nobody noticed cleaners and maintenance workers. They were perceived only as a necessary evil. Everyone around her talked about their accomplishments, successes, and career advancements, while her own career path hovered in the same place. While she scrubbed floors and wiped down desks in spacious offices, Olga thought about her life. She had graduated from university, studying business management with ambitions and dreams of a bright future. In her head, she constantly made plans of how she would one day hold a high position in the company, negotiate with partners, and lead project meetings. But instead, her reality was limited to cleaning the very building she once dreamed of working in. Student dreams seemed so far away now, and every day, filled with constant office cleaning duties, became more and more monotonous and tedious. Olga often listened to the conversation of her colleagues, the conversations of employees who came to the offices, talking about their successes and joys. Sometimes passing by the meeting rooms, she heard the managers discussing important business matters, and she felt sad. Long ago, she reconciled herself to the fact that her place here was a place no one noticed. After all, she wasn't part of the team for them, wasn't an important figure in the company. She was someone who simply ensured order and cleanliness, who provided comfort to others, but remained outside their world herself. Every day, Olga found it harder and harder to hide her frustrations. Her work was important, but she felt she was invisible to everyone. At some meetings, she couldn't even imagine that someday she would be sitting at a table like this, conducting important negotiations like the people who pass by her every day, holding a glass of coffee and discussing million-dollar projects. She knew that her education could have been useful to the company, that she would have been a good manager, but instead, every day she tried to just endure the routine and not think about the fact that she could have been something more. Sometimes she asked herself, "What am I missing?" And each time she found the same answer. She felt that it wasn't just her job that was limiting her, but that she herself had been sitting in the shadows for too long. She wanted to prove to herself that she was worthy of more. She didn't want her life to still be only within the confines of this uniform and this building. Olga longed for recognition, for her opinions and ideas to be able to matter, not to still be just voiceless musings hidden under a layer of dust and damp rags. However, even if she lifted her head and tried to look around, there was a wall in front of her again, a wall of barriers that were between her and those who sat at the shiny tables and decided important matters. There were those who believed in their own strength, and she, despite her best efforts, felt out of this world. She followed the life of the company, watched as employees shared new knowledge, discussed projects, drew strategic plans. But each time, she was brought back to her real role, that of a janitor whose presence was only clear the moment someone stepped on the trash. This was her reality. Her co-workers, just like her, the janitors, the maintenance staff, didn't talk about ambitions or career dreams. They knew their role and fulfilled it. Olga, on the other hand, seemed to still be in her own dreamy world, in which there was no room for others like herself. There were no steps in her path that could be labeled a victory. There were no victories in her world, only a constant struggle with reality. She asked herself more and more often, what if I could have been something more, if it weren't for this wall, if I had been given a chance? And then one day, after another dreary day at work, Olga decided that she would no longer wait for things to change on their own. She no longer wanted to be invisible, no longer wanted her dreams to still be just dreams. She firmly decided that if she wasn't given a chance, she would take it. She began to think about how she could prove herself, how she could get to the center of this life she had only dreamed of. But to do so, she needed to take the first step, to transcend her fear and hidden barriers. She realized that she needed to seize every opportunity to start changing her life. A new determination was born inside her. She was ready to fight for her dream, even if she had to start from the bottom. Her life was just beginning, and now, despite her small role in a huge company, Olga knew that she had a chance to change everything. She would no longer remain silent. Several days passed, and Olga became more and more immersed in her thoughts about how to change her life. She decided that she would not sit back, wait and watch others build their careers while she stayed behind the scenes. Having decided that it was necessary to act, Olga began to look for ways to attract attention and how to find her chance in this huge company. But her world still remained in the shadows. Every day she continued to do her job as if she were part of a mechanism, without any influence. But one day, everything changed. It happened at the most unexpected moment, when Olga, as always, was doing her job and dusting in one of the offices on the top floor of the building. She noticed that some man was walking into the director's office with unusual confidence. He was dressed in a strict suit, but his demeanor was completely different from the rest of the staff. He wasn't looking for compliments. He wasn't trying to look better than others. He was just being himself. This man, as it turned out later, was the CEO of the company herself, Alexandra. Но вот что по-настоящему удивило Марину. Екатерина, женщина, которая была символом этой огромной корпорации, вела себя так, как будто была одним из работников, ничего не выделяясь среди прочих. She was dressed as if she herself was a mere employee, not the person running a huge network. Instead of being in plain sight as always, she disappeared among the ordinary people as if she had her own hidden purpose, and no one but Olga noticed how unusual her behavior was. Olga passed by the office several times, thinking that she should not meddle in other people's affairs, but her curiosity was stronger. She couldn't take her eyes off the way Alexandra moved around the office, the way her unremarkable appearance fooled everyone for a moment. It seemed strange, because such an important figure as the CEO of a company couldn't afford to be so unremarkable. It was a contradiction. She was too ordinary to be so important, but at the same time, there was something majestic in her behavior. After several meetings with her colleagues, Olga was finally able to see Alexandra live and hear her talk. She was back in her regular uniform like any other employee, but her mannerisms, her tone and confidence gave her away as more than just an average worker. Why is she hiding her identity? This question never left Olga's mind. Shocked by what she saw, Olga decided to find out a little more about Alexander. As soon as she was in the kitchen, she heard colleagues discussing the strange behavior of their CEO. It was truly amazing. Everyone was talking about how often Alexandra appeared among the employees, and how she managed to blend in with the crowd while going unnoticed. Why is she hiding? The question arose again, and now Olga was convinced that there was some mystery behind it. One evening, when the offices were already empty and only a few employees remained to complete their tasks, Olga decided to approach Alexandra, who, as usual, was walking down the hallway in her uniform, heading for her office. Without thinking of the consequences, Olga took a step forward and spoke quietly to her. "I noticed that you're not quite like everyone else," Olga said with slight excitement in her voice. "Why do you prefer to hide your real identity?" Alexandra paused, but her gaze was calm, and she seemed to realize that Olga might ask this question. She looked at her carefully, and then, with a slight smile, she said, "I have always been close to people. Sometimes in order to understand them and be on the same page with them, I need to be like everyone else. People often stop trusting those who stand too tall, and I don't want to be an exception." Olga stood in front of her, pondering her words. This explanation seemed simple to her, but there was some depth to it. She began to realize that Alexandra might not just be hiding her identity, but was doing it in order to break down the barriers between herself and her employees, to create an atmosphere of trust and openness. Suddenly her behavior, which Olga first perceived as strange, began to look like part of a larger strategy. "But isn't it hard to live like this?" Olga asked, her voice full of questions and bewilderment. Alexandra looked at her and answered quietly, "Yes, sometimes it is difficult. But I believe that for real success, you need not only to see how people work, but also to be part of the process. When you're at the top, it's hard to be around people you don't connect with on the same level. People can only become part of your team if they feel your presence is an equal." Olga stood pensive, reflecting on her words. It was like a blow to the head. Until that moment she had thought that the highest positions were only for the strongest and most confident people. But now, with this new realization, she was beginning to doubt that. She began to wonder, what if these weren't just questions of status, but of true leadership? Alexandra continued, "You're smart, Olga, and I can see that you care about what's going on in our company. If you want to change something, you need to learn to look at things from different angles, to be brave and to act. And if you realize that, you can not only be part of the change, but you can lead it. These words hooked Marina. She felt her own feelings of the world begin to change. Here, in her company, in her place as a cleaner, she suddenly realized that she could be much more than just an observer. Alexandra, her secrecy and manners, her leadership and tolerance of the employees, changed her views. Olga felt that perhaps her dreams of a different future, of a different life, were not so far away. She had long aspired to be something more, and now she began to see the path to her dream. Olga couldn't forget her conversation with Alexandra. There was something in her words that touched her. She felt her feelings of the world begin to change. Perhaps everything she had dreamed of was not as unattainable as she had thought. If she could change her approach even a little, she could be part of the change, as Alexandra had said. But how exactly do I do that? How do you go from being a janitor to being a leader? As she continued to do her job each day, Olga began to notice how many details around her went unnoticed by most. She saw employees coming and going, doing their own thing, without questioning how it all affected the larger context. However, she began to notice how companies, though seemingly perfect on an external level, were actually hiding a host of problems that everyone else overlooked. One day, Olga saw a very strange scene. Они обсуждали методы, которые явно не подходили для создания здоровой атмосферы на рабочем месте. Один из них, менеджер по продажам, говорил о том, как легко манипулировать клиентами, навязывая им дополнительные товары, и как это повышает прибыль. They were discussing methods that were clearly not suitable for creating a healthy atmosphere in the workplace. One of them, a sales manager, talked about how easy it is to manipulate customers by pushing added products on them and how this increases profits. This is pure exploitation, thought Olga as she listened to their conversation. Is it really allowed in this company? But the conversation didn't end there. The second manager he was talking to shared his experience about how easy it is to manipulate workers, forcing them to work overtime without extra pay, promising promises of promising growth in return. Olga felt something inside her clench. These were her co-workers who could have carried out so much more if the conditions had been fair, but instead, many of them probably didn't know they were being taken advantage of. She began to realize that the company she worked for was hiding a far from perfect picture behind a facade of luxury and success. After the managers finished their conversation and left, Olga was left standing in the room, realizing that she needed to do something to change the situation. How could she, a simple cleaning lady, interfere in these processes? What could she do to at least start talking about these problems? That night when she got home, she couldn't get that conversation out of her head. The manager's words were running through her head, and she thought she was beginning to realize more and more what was going on behind the scenes. All these hidden mechanisms, the manipulation of customers and exploitation of employees that had become a revelation to her, were part of a system that was much bigger than her usual feeling of work. Olga could not remain indifferent. She knew that if she did nothing, this information would remain hidden from everyone. But how could she be effective if she had no power or status? She was just a cleaning lady. However, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that unless she took action, no one would. No one would stand up for those who had no way to express their rights. The next day, as she pondered possible steps, she met Alexandra again in the hallway. This meeting was like a sign. Alexandra noticed her pensive face and, despite her seriousness, approached her. "Olga, you look worried about something," she said, squinting her eyes slightly. "You look like you've found something that's troubling you. Is that so?" Olga stopped, feeling her hands trembling slightly. Her thoughts were confused, but she realized that she couldn't stay silent now. Her voice was quiet but confident as she began to recount what she had heard. "I heard some managers discussing practices that I consider unethical," she said, trying not to pause in her speech. "I know it's not my job to get involved, but I can't just keep quiet knowing that this is happening." Alexandra listened to her carefully and was silent for a while. Olga couldn't understand what she was thinking, but soon Alexandra spoke. "You did the right thing by telling me about this," she said, determination in her voice. "And I'm ready to help you. But to have influence, you have to tread carefully. You can't fight the system behind these people alone." Olga felt her chest fill with gratitude and wonder. All this time she'd thought her worries and concerns were of no interest to anyone, but now that Alexandra had listened to her and given her support, she felt that maybe she had a chance to be effective in this world. I'm ready to help, Olga, Alexandra continued. You're not the only one who sees what's going on. You deserve more than that. We will make sure that everyone in our company can work honestly and openly. These words were a real revelation to Olga. She realized that perhaps her life could change if she acted, if she fought for justice. In that moment, she felt that her dream of more, of a fair and just life, could become a reality. Olga couldn't believe what had just happened. Alexandra, one of the most powerful women in the company, supported her, listened to her, and even promised to help her. For Olga, it was like a lightning strike. She had not expected that someone in her position, and with such status, could show such sincere support. She could not get rid of the feeling that her life finally had a chance to change. The next day, when she went to work again, the atmosphere seemed completely different. Work processes continued as usual, but for Olga, the whole world suddenly became more open. She replayed Alexandra's words over and over in her head. She knew that to begin with, she had to act cautiously, but now she had a goal. She could be effective. Every day, Olga began to see more and more of the hidden aspects of working at the company. Slippery manipulation of customers, dishonest deals, pressure on employees to make big profits. It all became quite obvious to her. Had she really overlooked all of this for so long while working for this company? Or was it happening gradually, and she, like everyone else, was just turning a blind eye to the obvious? That day, when the conversation with Alexandra was still fresh in her mind, she approached the HR manager named Irina. Irina was one of the few people who, in Olga's opinion, was a reasonably honest and straightforward person. She always avoided dirty manipulation and held her line, although she often came under pressure from management. Perhaps Irina could help in the future. Olga didn't know where to start, but she felt she couldn't stay away. "Irina, I need to talk to you," Olga said when she met her in the kitchen. Irina turned around, at once noticing that Olga looked serious. "What's wrong? You look kind of tense," she asked, noticing the worry in her eyes. Olga took a deep breath, thought for a few seconds, and then spoke. "This isn't the first year you've worked here, right? I've noticed something that's been bothering me. Maybe you've noticed it before, but there's a problem in our company. We're not dealing with clients the way we should, and I think a lot of employees aren't getting what they deserve. I don't like what I've heard. I don't know where to start." Irina looked at her intently, clearly assessing how serious her words were. "You're right, Olga. It's not news," she said after a short pause. "We all know that things aren't so clean here, but what are you going to do about it? You realize that if you start making changes, you might find yourself in a difficult situation. Most people here are just afraid of losing their jobs. They don't want to take risks." Olga nodded. She was prepared to face difficulties, but now her decision was firm. She felt that something had to change, and if she didn't start small, no one would start at all. Ирина посмотрела на нее. Ее выражение лица стало более серьезным. Она не говорила сразу, что она готова к этому, но Марина заметила, как ее взгляд смягчился, и она кивнула. «Я готова помочь». «Ты не одна, Марина», — сказала Ирина. Irina looked at her, her expression becoming more serious. She didn't say right away that she was ready for this, but Olga noticed her gaze soften, and she nodded. "I'm ready to help." "You're not alone, Olga," Irina said. "Maybe if you do the right thing, we can be effective." Olga felt something stirring in her chest. Hope. That was the first step. Now she had an ally, and that meant much more than just a conversation. But there were long days of work ahead, of finding solutions and making hard decisions. She knew it would be difficult, that she would have to face many obstacles and barriers, but now she had a chance to do something important. "Thank you, Irina," she said, calming down a little. "I thought I would be alone in this, but now I have support." "You're not alone," Irina replied, her gaze hard. "If you and I take action, maybe others will join us. Everyone wants change, but they are afraid to act. We should be the ones to start." Olga felt her confidence growing. If someone had told her 6 months ago that she would fight the system, she would have laughed. But now, with each new day, she realized that anything was possible. If she worked with people like Irina, she had a chance to change at least something in this company. And if her efforts resulted in being able to change the working atmosphere and conditions, she would be proud of it. But she had a serious challenge in front of her. Olga realized that the fight for justice was not just talk and discussion. It would be a fight for truth. to be heard, and to take action. She was preparing herself to be a part of something bigger than she herself could ever imagine. As she drove home that evening, she thought about the fact that she would not only have to wake up her co-workers, but also overcome the fear that her efforts might not be perceived. But now that she had an ally, now that she was beginning to realize that she wasn't really alone, her resolve only grew stronger. So, her journey began. More and more, Olga felt her growing resolve turning into a firm conviction. Her plan was becoming clearer and clearer, even though the road ahead was full of uncertainty. Every morning when she went to work, she felt her heart beating faster, because she was ready to be part of the change. But at the same time, she was well aware that every step would be hard and require not only effort, but also determination. Every day she became more and more courageous. Irina, her only ally, supported her every step of the way, helping her, doing her best not to make any big mistakes on the way to change. They began planning how they could start small, first and foremost improving working conditions for employees who, like her once, had no voice. Olga knew they needed to start by getting people to start noticing that their opinions mattered. "We have to give them a voice," Irina said as they discussed their lunchtime plans. "Many employees don't know that they have the right to say what they don't like. We have to create an atmosphere of trust." Olga nodded. She realized it might be difficult, but every day she felt more and more that her actions could not be in vain. One day, when she and Irina were discussing the project, one of the senior staff members, Sergei, approached them. Olga remembered him from the very first day she had joined the company. He was one of those who had long held his position and saw his job as something unchangeable. "Olga, aren't you afraid of the consequences of all this?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "You know that this company does not tolerate troublemakers, people who start talking about things they don't like, usually to end up in the shadows. I've seen this happen more than once." Olga didn't feel fear. It was something she had felt for a long time. If she didn't start, if she didn't try to change the system, someone else would continue to keep silent, as she had done before. "I'm not afraid, Sergei," she answered firmly. "We have a chance to make the company better, and if we don't start changing things right now, we'll all stay in this swamp." Sergei looked at her in surprise. He hadn't expected Olga to be so sure of her words, but then, for a moment, his face changed, and he nodded. "All right, if you've made up your mind, I'll support you," he said. "But keep in mind that you're not alone. All of us here can be part of the change if we act together." Those words were a major turning point. Olga now knew that she had support not only from Irina, but also from the other employees. She felt her world was changing with each step. They started organizing meetings where employees gathered to discuss what could be done to improve working conditions, to make processes more transparent, and to ensure equality. More and more people started to speak up, and they marveled at how much their working conditions could change if they started to act together. Olga continued to work with Irina, and their joint efforts began to bear the first fruits. They began to develop a plan to introduce new practices and principles that would help employees to open up and management to realize that change was necessary. Everything went according to plan, but as always, with each step ahead, new obstacles arose. When they proposed the idea of meetings with managers to discuss working conditions, many began to hesitate, and there were those who tried to stay on the sidelines. One day, at one of these meetings, the HR director, Ludmila, expressed her displeasure. "What are you trying to carry out with this?" she asked with a cold stare. "We are already working, and all we have to do is fulfill our duties. Leave such initiatives for those who want to engage in unnecessary chatter." Olga felt her confidence waver for a moment. It was the moment when she could have backed down, when her efforts might have been in vain. But something inside her told her to go on, to fight for what she believed in. "We don't want talk, Ludmila," she said, holding her gaze. "We want change. We want to make our company a place where it's important not only to carry out tasks, but to feel part of something bigger, where every employee can express his or her opinion and be heard." Ludmila looked at her in silence, but those words seemed to change something. The next day, she agreed to Olga's proposal to hold meetings with the management. It was a small, but important step towards big changes. Olga would return home late at night, feeling her shoulders grow lighter. Things were beginning to change, and her efforts, her struggles, were not in vain. She realized that there would be a lot of work and difficult decisions ahead, but now she was sure they were on the right path.